Well, welcome everyone. We are so excited to have Trevor MacKenzie with us. I got to hear about Trevor through, I think it was Denise Krebs. She had recommended Trevor as a really good educator, thought leader around student-centered learning and inquiry-based learning. And so we are so thrilled to have him with us to share his expertise and knowledge around inquiry-based learning. And so he has in the past been an instructional coach and a high school ELA teacher. He's currently on sabbatical this year, lives in Canada, and as I said, he's an author of Dive into Inquiry and Inquiry Mindsets, and he will be sharing more information about his books later on in the webinar. So welcome, Trevor, and I'll let you go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Leslie. And welcome everyone who's watching from wherever you are. I love that this is recorded, and I love how equitable it is so that teachers can find this resource, find this recording, and watch it when they can and when they want. I talk a lot about student agency, and I think hand in hand with student agency is teacher agency. And any way we can provide that agency for teachers and our colleagues, I think is really, really powerful. As Julie mentioned, I'm a full-time teacher on leave this year. I took a sabbatical this year. I teach high school English, mostly at the senior level here in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. If you haven't been to the west coast of Canada or Victoria, you simply must. This is my formal invite for you to come and visit me and visit my school, or at least have a cup of coffee in beautiful Victoria. It's a stunning city. Great place to raise a family. I'm a father of two boys, age 7 and 10. Gregor's 7 years old. He's in grade 2, really into basketball. And Ewan is my 10-year-old, and he's in grade 5, and he's really into World War I military history. That's his current curiosity. So, you know, as a father and a husband, but as a father more specifically, you know, my children really do drive a lot of my inquiry practice, if you will. I look at all of my students in the high school setting as being highly curious, inquisitive, unique individuals. And my job, my challenge is to treat them as such and not enter the classroom with a blanket approach, but enter the classroom with a much more inquiry-driven approach that allows me to be agile and responsive to those unique characteristics and interests that my students are entering the classroom with. I'm beyond a high school teacher. I'm also a consultant and an author. As Julia mentioned, I've written 2 books, Dive into Inquiry, Amplify Learning and Empower Student Voice, and Inquiry Mindset, Nurturing the Dreams, Passions, and Wonders of Our Youngest Students. Inquiry Mindset's written for the K-5 educator, the elementary school educator specifically, whereas Dive was really written for anyone in our educational kind of structure, K to higher ed. In my travels after having written Dive, I realized that elementary school teachers really required some specific examples and language and resources. So that's the push that asked me to write Inquiry Mindset. You know, I do a lot of consulting that stems from my published work. The sabbatical this year is really allowing me to visit a lot more schools. So Julie was asking me how I do it all. How do I teach and travel and support schools? Traditionally, my school district, an amazing district here in Victoria, the Greater Victoria School District, they give me about 15 days of unpaid time to visit schools around the world. And this year on sabbatical, I'm able to visit more. You know, I was just in Europe for the month of November. And I'll be across North America, Chicago, Florida, California, and then across Canada. And then overseas, I'll be in London, the Netherlands, South Africa, and India this year. And I bring that up humbly, quite honestly, humbly, because it really does reflect this global conversation happening around student-centered learning. And this conversation wasn't as prevalent 10 years ago as it is today. It's such a fascinating time to be in the classroom, to reimagine our roles as educators in the classroom and reimagine the experience for our students. And so when I visit schools around the world, it really is, you know, where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, as to what student-centered learning looks like and what inquiry looks like. So what I'd like to do is share some resources with you throughout this webinar. We have about a half an hour together today. I'm a little bit crunched for time because I have to pick up my kids from school. There's my father hat for you, my parenthood hat. But I'd like to share some resources and talk you through them and challenge you to really take these resources back to your school and to your staff, to use with your colleagues and with your students to help really demystify what inquiry is. And everything that I talk about will help you in that process. so that you can bring this conversation back to your students and to your staff. So I'll share my screen now. And Julie and Leslie, if there's anything that happens here as I'm sharing, just pipe up and let me know. I'm pretty tech savvy, but you never know with technology how it's going to go. Can you see my screen okay, ladies? Great, thank you so much. So I'm just going to go into presentation mode here. This is just a simple slide deck that I've created for our time together, and I'm going to talk us through it. These are my two publications, as I mentioned, Dive and Mindset. But really, I wanted to draw your attention to the online channels where you can reach out to me. You know, my Twitter account, my Instagram, and my website. The website has a bunch of free resources, including everything that I'm sharing with you today. All the sketch notes that I show you, you can download for free on the website. And there's a really rich conversation happening on Twitter and Instagram around student-centered learning that I've kind of been pulling together throughout my time as a consultant and as an educator. So, you know, please find those spaces, find those resources, and interact with that community. It's a rich, vibrant conversation. And I always say sharing is caring. We are better together. And it's a fantastic time to be an educator, to be able to connect with teachers around the world. So I love this sketch note. I'll provide some context for you. You know, in my visiting schools, I'm typically brought in with regards to in three capacities. One capacity is leading a district or a big conference room or gymnasium full of teachers through a day-long workshop of inquiry. And so, you know, anywhere as small as 30 teachers all the way up to 500 teachers in a space where I'm slowly workshopping different ideas around implementation with a large group. You know, a second capacity is teachers, schools invite me to do some demonstration teaching. And this is so stressful because they give me a class of students that I've never met before and I have no relationship with, and they say, do something amazing and we'll critique you and learn from you. And so typically a team of teachers stands at the back of the room and they watch me teach and they take notes. And then the third capacity, and the one that I actually really, really enjoy, is I'm invited in to observe teachers in inquiry teach. And I'm the one at the back of the room, and they've given me some kind of lesson plan or outline, and they're asking for my feedback after the lesson. And I love that opportunity because of the vulnerability and the trust that that educator is showing me, but just the growth that can happen with regards to our dialogue, our discourse after the lesson in regards to them elevating their inquiry teaching. So this sketch note really is a reflection of everything I've observed over the last 12 years in visiting schools. This is a great collaborative sketch note done with Sylvia Duckworth. If you're not familiar with Sylvia's work, Google her, Google image her, and you'll see her body of sketch notes pop up, and find her on Twitter. She's a fantastic Canadian teacher. And we collaborated on this because I asked Sylvia to please help me bring these ideas of what I'm seeing in these classrooms to life for teachers. And typically when I visit a school, I'll share this sketch note with them just as I'm sharing it with you. And I'll ask teachers to reflect on, of all these characteristics, which characteristics would surface in your classroom if I were to come and watch you teach. And it's important to note that these characteristics wouldn't surface in a single lesson. These don't happen in an hour. These happen across time, across a sequence of lessons. So likely if I were to observe you teach for a week or 2 weeks, that would be amazing, I know. 2 weeks, I would see all of these characteristics surface across that time. And what I'm looking for are for teachers who really share the evidence of these characteristics. You know, what is the nitty-gritty that allows us to know that these characteristics actually are happening in your classroom? So I'll model this for the webinar here. You know, if you were to visit me teach in my classroom at Oak Bay High School in Victoria, you would definitely see number 8, fortifying the importance of asking good questions. You know, I'm a big fan of the question formulation technique. If you're not familiar with the question formulation technique, that's QFT for short. The QFT, it's an amazing questioning protocol that we could use in our classroom to teach our students how to become stronger questioners. And the question formulation technique, it's from a book called Make Just One Change by Dan Rothstein and Lou Santana. They have a great website full of free resources. But the QFT, that's the evidence of number 8 being alive and vibrant in my classroom. So if you were to watch me teach, you could definitely pinpoint that evidence. And so I'm going to call on you ladies here shortly, Julie, especially if you don't mind. I'm going to ask you to share one characteristic from your experience and what is the evidence of that. So just prefacing you, I'll pitch it over to you in a moment. Typically what I do is I ask an entire staff of teachers, which of these characteristics would be evident in your classroom? And then I'd give them all a sticky note pad, a pad of sticky notes. And I'd ask them to write down all of the numbers of the characteristics that they possess. And we would actually, as a staff, we would chart them out on one wall in whatever space we were learning in. And we would have this brilliant bar graph, if you will, of a collection of what we do well as a school culture of inquiry, 1 through 10. And what I'm looking for are holes in that bar graph, right? Like if I see a lot of number 1s and a lot of number 2s, but I see very few number 3s, that lets me know that the teachers have stated they need support with number 3. So even in how we learn about inquiry, there has to be teacher agency, there has to be teacher voice. And I don't want the experience of learning about inquiry be just a sit and get, where I'm just going to talk at them for an hour or 8 hours. Could you imagine me talking at a group for 8 hours? I can't even do it anymore. So what I want to do is, how do I share the workload with my learners? How do I really capture their voice and their understanding, their thinking, to be able to shape our next steps as learners? And that's what I'm modeling here with this exercise. I'm demystifying inquiry for all of us who are interested in inquiry. And then I'm genuinely giving people a voice in what our next steps are in this learning journey. So again, if you can imagine bringing this sketch note back to your school, having this conversation just as I prefaced it, maybe at a staff meeting or at a Pro D day, and you ask the group using sticky notes to chart out which characteristics they individually possess, but collectively we post those all together, and then we get a great map as to what we're doing really, really well and what our next steps are as an inquiry community in terms of what we need to know more about to do it better. So Julie, I'm going to pitch it over to you now. It's a big challenge. I'm putting you on the spot, and partly it's just so I can get a drink of water, you know, but also I'd love to hear your opinion here. You know, from your experience in education, what's one of these characteristics that have happened in your experience, and what's the evidence of that, if you don't mind?
Well, I would probably connect to number 1. And I would say as a teacher, I would say I probably did a surface level of number 1, nurturing student passions and talents, where I would find out more about my kids, like what they were interested in. If they didn't have a day of school or work, what would they spend their time on and why? But as I, got, I'm going to say, more into learning as a result of my role as an educational consultant, I realized that what I needed to do as a teacher was to go deeper and actually combine those interests and passions and talents, their strengths, and connect it more with the actual learning that's taking place. So, for example, if I was teaching math and there was I knew about my kids through kind of, I would say, through like an interest inventory, like a profile, and I knew that kids at whatever age were interested in whatever topic, then I would try to wrap around maybe that context in kind of some math, maybe story problems or scenarios or context. Or I'd give kids choice in thinking about how they could use their strengths to kind of show demonstration of learning based off of their passion or talent. If somebody's really good at music, if somebody's really good at speaking or role playing, or could they tie in what they're really good at as a way of even demonstration of learning. So I feel as a teacher, I did a superficial level of that. But now, as an, obviously you should get better year after year. And as you learn and read, you grow. I feel like if I went back in the classroom, I would probably be stronger in that. But that would be what I would say, an example of how one could nurture student passions and talents.
I love it. I could have just totally muted my mic and backed away and let you take the webinar over, because you bring up such a really powerful point, Julie, which is that we do need to get to know our students first. Before we roll out our curriculum, not only is it relationship building, but that information that we are garnering through those surveys and those little learner profiles that many of us do, we use those to leverage future learning experiences. So not only are we building trust and relationship, but we're making connections to our curriculum. And I think that's a piece that I've really gotten better at over the course of my career, just as what you're referring to is, once I know that information, what do I do with it to help the curriculum come to life for my students? So as I know their interests, as I know their curiosities, as I know their passions through these surveys and these profiles and these questionnaires, how can I actually be more agile with the content in the curriculum so those two can come together? And when those two come together, our students' interests and curiosities and wonders and our curriculum, that's where we see relevance. And we know what happens when there's relevance for the students. Achievement increases, absolutely, no matter what the assessment tool is. Student achievement is boosted when there's personal relevance for each and every student. So, although you only spoke for a brief minute and a half or 2 minutes, you bring up a really powerful point, which is we need to get to know our students before we teach our students. I visited this amazing school in Brisbane, Australia last summer, and the whole school has this know me before you teach me mantra, which is, the principal has said, in the first 2 weeks of school, I don't want to see any of you doing any formal teaching. I don't want to see anything in the photocopiers that, reflects a lesson plan or a worksheet or a textbook lying around anywhere. I just want you to build community and get to know your kids and build relationship. And she, in turn, has given the teachers agency, not just with that time, but more importantly, how they spend that time to build relationship and culture in their classrooms. And this school reports out some amazing data in terms of the community of learning that is built from those 2 weeks, the trust that is built from those 2 weeks, and how it impacts future learning experiences throughout the year. So, relationship is important. That's a universal truth in education. And then what do we do with that relationship? How do we connect it to our curriculum is a really important one. In continuing with this exercise with this sketch note, I just want to reconnect with that one wall in our rooms as we roll this out with our staff, that bar graph, if you will, of all the things our staff members have said they do really well. Because what I want to do is do another wall on the other side of the room, but it's not going to be what we do really well. It's going to be one individualized goal from each teacher in the room with regards to a characteristic that they want to roll out more intentionally and learn more about in their practice in the coming weeks and months ahead once this discussion, this conversation is over with. And so it's going to be the same process. I'm going to cue the audience, the group of teachers, to please reflect on one goal, because teachers have a nasty tendency of doing it all. I'll set 5 goals. I want this one goal to be really achievable, be something that we can measure and report out on at our next meeting. And so I'll say, identify one goal, write it on a sticky note, and let's post all of our goals on this side of the room. And then what I get to see is really clearly, well, what do teachers want to know more about? Because the bar graph on this side of the room let me see some holes and let me make some steps and some plans for the future. But on this side of the room, the teachers have clearly said, I want to invest my time with regards to a specific goal of these 10. And so that really helps me plan future professional development experiences for my staff, for my colleagues, what resources I bring in. Maybe it's a book club. Maybe it's a webinar kind of like this. Maybe it's a podcast that I could suggest through an email. But also it allows me to connect all those goals on the left side of the room over here with what we've said we do really well on this side of the room over here. So Leslie and Julie, you don't have to speak. I'll use you two as an example. Let's say Julie has said she does number 8 really, really well. And she posted that over here. And Leslie has said, well, wait a sec, number 8's my goal. Well, we have 2 people who should come together now for a brief period of time in this, conversation, in this time together, and actually mentor one another. So Leslie can say, Julie, how does that look? How do you do number 8? What does that look like in your classroom? Teach me. Like 10-minute mini lesson. That's all I'm asking of my staff. 10-minute mini lesson. And what we find is when teachers come together with that agency to support one another, we're building a collaborative community where teachers care about one another's success and one another's growth. And that does impact student experiences. When teachers love coming to work because of the collaborative community they're a part of, kids love to be in that community, in that environment. So again, what I'm doing is I'm taking Leslie, who said she has a goal, and connecting her with Julie, who says she does that thing really, really well. and I'm bringing those two teachers together to mentor one another and have a conversation. Once Julie's done sharing, well, Julie has a goal too. Julie needs to spend a few minutes finding someone that could support her with her goal. If ever there's someone in the room that has no one to support them with their goal, and I have to say, I've never seen that happen ever, that's where I step in and I say, okay, what's your goal? You know, I'm the expert. I've written about this. I know this. Let's sit down together for 10 minutes and I'll help you. But I always try to back away to let the strength of the learners come together. And I say that really intentionally because that's precisely what we want for our students when the timing is right. When can we step aside to let the community of students come together to build an understanding so it's just not a sit and get learning experience? So they are active in the role in the classroom, and that helps us dictate our next steps. So in a nutshell, we spent about 15 minutes talking about this sketch note, talking about the context of which you could roll it out with your staff, and how you could turn that discussion into some professional development ongoing. I encourage you, I know ladies, you're going to post this webinar. If there's any discussion happening around this webinar, whether it's in the Facebook community or live in this chat right now, please ask those teachers to ping me, send me a message on Twitter or an email if that works for them, if they have any questions around what are some ideas as to how we can bring these characteristics to life in our classroom. I'm going to transition to the next slide here. I love, love, love Zoom because I could see you over here and I could see my slides. It's such a great platform. So this is the heart of my work. You know, this swimming pool graphic really reflects a lot of growth that I made as an inquiry teacher. And in that growth, in the challenges and the barriers and the mistakes I made, how can I clarify to make the process much easier for teachers and for students wanting to bring inquiry to the learning in their schools? So, you know, one barrier to successful inquiry implementation is, you know, really clearly defining what it is we mean by inquiry. You know, there are 4 of us live right now, and if I were to ask you to write down a definition of inquiry, I bet you we would have 4 very different definitions. And that's highly problematic when we're trying to roll out something that is student-centered. When the teachers in the building don't have a common understanding, the students are going to be negatively impacted. So this graphic really helps, first of all, teachers really understand that there are 4 types of inquiry, and all 4 types are amazing. One is not better than the other. Like, all 4 of these has a time and a place in our classrooms. And it breaks down a really powerful inquiry myth and misconception, which is that inquiry is only free inquiry. It's only the deep end of the pool. And that's just not the case. You know, the deep end can be pretty darn amazing and pretty powerful, but it can also be really catastrophic if the students don't have the proper skills and understandings to be successful in the deep end of the pool. So, you know, for me, in my high school setting, these are 4 units of study across the school year, and we spend about 2 months in each type with each unit. We start in the shallow end, we start in structured. After a few months, we slowly transitioned into controlled, then into guided, and if the students are ready at the end of the year, we'll embark into a free inquiry, if you will. And that scaffolding allows a number of things to happen. It allowed students to gain those skills and understandings that they need to be successful. It allows them to feel more confident and less anxious in inquiry, because many students, if I'm honest, have had the agency schooled out of them over the course of their education. And that's a sad truth, that's a sad reality, in that they've become really complacent in their learning. And if we throw them into the deep end too fast and too soon, it's going to be really dissimilar to everything that they've experienced in their education to date. And that's not what we want to do. We don't want to shock them into this, you know, reality of the depths of inquiry. We want to gradually introduce them to having more agency over learning and gradually shift our role in inquiry so that we're just not kicking them into the deep end. Another really big benefit of this scaffolding is it allows us to balance our curricular objectives and demands and assessment tools in inquiry. You know, an inquiry myth is that inquiry is done, you know, over here and our curriculum's done over here. Like, it's an either or conversation. And that's just not the case. These two should be woven really, really magically, powerfully together. And how we do that is through the scaffolding that this graphic proposes, so that there are certain curricular elements, if you will, that really are best suited in the shallow end. There are certain pieces of each of our curriculum, no matter what we teach, whether it's math, physics, English language arts, music. There are certain curricular objectives that belong in different types depending on what it is we teach and who it is that we're teaching. And so this graphic really forces us as the educator in the room to imagine our curriculum through these types. Where in my curriculum would guided really, really be robust and sustained and authentic? Where would my curriculum be more better suited in the structured end? And so that's where I'm planning my units of study, is through the lens of these 4 types. Undeniably, towards the end, towards deep, free inquiry, it should belong in my classroom. Meaning, if I'm a physics teacher, then physics inquiry should happen in the free inquiry side. If I'm a math teacher, free inquiry should be about math. It's not an either or. Again, we want to weave those 2 pieces together. So I love this graphic. It hangs in my classroom. And what I mean by that is I printed off a massive poster. It's bigger than this. It's like this. And I point to it often. And I point to it because students need to see how our learning and their agency is going to shift across time and how their role is going to shift. And by them seeing that there's intentionality to this gradual release of responsibility over learning, it puts them at ease and it gives them a sense of confidence, which they really do need when it comes to student-centered learning. So I encourage you, again, at trevormackenzie.com, you can download all of these sketch notes for free, high res, download them, print them on your color printer at school, or ask your principal to give you a few dollars to print them off at a copy center. And I also include them in my course syllabus. I print them on my course syllabus so parents know what the learning is going to look like throughout the year. And again, this is a great conversation to have with staff, isn't it? Just like the previous sketch note, this sketch note, I'm going to propose that you bring it to your staff, you provide some context just as I have, and you ask teachers, where in the swimming pool do you have experience? Where have you been in the swimming pool? Have you been in the deep end, the shallow end? And get them sharing, get them talking about, what went really well, but more importantly, what went really bad? Like, how did it fall short? And how can we all learn from those mistakes? For free inquiry, a really rich example is early in my career, that was all I did, was free inquiry at the end of the year, free inquiry. And then the rest of the year was kind of traditional Trevor MacKenzie teaching. I'm at the front of the room behind my lecture stand talking at a group for 8 months of the year. How boring does that sound? And the sad part was that, it was an either or for me. It was either entirely teacher directed or entirely student directed. And the vast difference between those 2 types of learning experiences really negatively impacted my students. When it came to free inquiry, they were overwhelmed, they were anxious, and they were unprepared. And so I needed to find a way to weave those 2 types together, a teacher-focused inquiry and a student-centered inquiry. And that's where the scaffolding really comes into play, is that gradual shift from teacher-centered to student-centered across the year. This graphic is actually part of a series of slides. So I'm just going to go through these slides because the next slide really shows you 4 common elements of all inquiry units. For example, who's choosing the topic, who's designing the question, who is selecting the resources, and who is choosing what the product of learning, what the summative assessment is going to look like. And you can see that there's a lot of teacher-directed in the shallow end, and then when we transition into guided and get to free, there's a lot more student-centered decision-making and student ownership over learning. But that doesn't happen unless we go through the shallow end first. So again, I give this graphic to my students so they can see exactly what ownership looks like. Because we say ownership in class and we say, let's empower our students, but what does that really look like? And how can we demystify that for our kids, for our students? So this graphic helps. And again, it goes on. The next slide, simplifies it a bit, just who's taking on ownership over which role, and really helping students understand that, it's a shared responsibility. I'm just not kicking them into the deep end. There are times where I'm going to guide learning more, and then there are times where I'm going to step back a bit and helping them understand when that's going to occur. We're almost out of time. I want to share a sequence of slides with you now because they're some of my most favorite activities to bring into the inquiry classroom. And they all have to do with this idea of provocations. And I love this sketch note. This one was created by my co-author, as was the swimming pool instructor of Inquiry Mindset. Her name is Rebecca Bathurst-Hunt. She's a French immersion kindergarten teacher here in our school district. You can see her Twitter handle there at the top. I suggest finding her, following her. She's an amazing educator. And the idea of a provocation is really sparking curiosity and sparking interest with our students. How can we introduce our curriculum so immediately it's highly engaging and highly relevant to the student? So the provocation it's like the first thing I introduce in a unit. Before I bring in a textbook or a resource or access prior knowledge, I use a provocation to access that prior knowledge. So let me show you a couple of styles of provocations, and I'm sure through these different styles, you're going to get a sense as to what provocations are, how you're currently using them, because I bet many of you watching are using provocations, and if you're not, what you could do. So here's a really neat setting provocation. I love this one. So let's imagine kids show up for learning. It's first thing in the morning, and the teacher hasn't allowed them in the room. They're lined up outside, and the teacher comes to the door in role, and the teacher is putting on a bit of an act. Definitely, there's a bit of a show, so it's not completely authentic. There's a bit of a show happening here. And the teacher has said, something's happened inside the class, and I can't understand it. I need you to be inquirers, investigators. I need you to come in. I need you to grab a notepad. I need you to grab a pen and partner up with someone, and I want you to put your questioning hat on, and I want you to come in and try to figure out, try to solve what's happened in the room. And so kids come in right away. There's immediate engagement through this mystery, through this, inquisitiveness. They're coming in with a different role, and then they become observers. They become really, highly acutely sensing what it is that is in the room. And that, in turn, is creating a powerful learning experience. Like, we've switched on a different part of the brain when they come in with that inquisitive, spark, that high interest right away. And ideally, absolutely, I shouldn't say ideally, absolutely, this is going to lead us into our curriculum. Like, whatever's been designed in terms of this setting provocation should be leading us into something we're going to do ongoing for the next coming weeks or months. So this setting provocation was actually for a novel study that a class was going to read, that the first scene in the novel, guess what it is? It's a crime scene, and the main character was witness to a crime, and it starts with that anticipation, that sense of like, oh my gosh, I saw something, I need to tell the police what it is that I observed, what it is that I saw. And so by introducing the students to this setting provocation first, it scaffolds so beautifully into the novel so that when they read the novel, when they get into the first page of the book, they actually have empathy experience that is similar to the main character of the book. So setting provocations are amazingly fun. I want to show you a couple other ones here. This is a really gross one, but I love it. This is just an image. This is an image provocation. I would introduce this image provocation when we're learning about germs in science class. I would throw this up on the projector, and I would ask students 3 simple questions. And I use these questions all the time in my classroom. The first question is, well, what do you notice? What do you observe? What do you notice? And just like the setting provocation, they start writing down everything they see. Well, I see the dirty hands, bread looks blue and gross, where the clean and the controlled hands look clean and edible, right? That's a great observation. The next question I would ask is, well, what do you wonder? What questions do you have? And students will begin to say things like, well, what's the difference between controlled and clean and dirty? What are the difference between all 3? And they may be able to tell what the difference is between clean and dirty, but then what's controlled? And what is that blue stuff on the bread? Many of our students won't know what that is, especially at the younger years, they won't know what that is. And then the third question, after they've written down these ideas, the third question is, well, what do you know? What do you know is true? What do you know is fact? And that's where the smart kid, or the really observant kid, or maybe the kid who's had moldy bread in their bread drawer, puts up their hand and says, well, that's mold. I know what that is. That's because it's not fresh anymore, and that's because it's old and gross. And you can get sick if you eat that. What's really neat about this scaffolding of these 3 questions is that kid who knew all of that information, he didn't ruin the curiosity of everyone in the room by going first, which is traditionally what teachers do. traditionally teachers say, well, what's happening here? Who knows what's happening here? And that one kid throws up his hand and truly ruins the curiosity for everyone in the room. But if we can restructure with those 3 questions, how we engage our students in creating new understanding, it creates an equitable conversation where everyone's curiosities in the classroom are honored, and we get a better understanding of what each individual student knows and what they don't know to guide our next steps. So again, we want to save the what do you know question to the very end of this process, this routine, so that everyone's curiosity could be honored. So I love that one. Here's another one for germs. This is a GIF. I say GIF, you say GIF. We can still be friends, right? I love GIFs. These are those short animated videos. And again, this has to do with germs. You know, there's something happening here. And the same 3 questions. What do you notice? What do you wonder? What do you know? I would throw this up for maybe a senior level, junior level science class. And I think their observations would be really specific, dependent on the GIF that I'm showing, obviously, compared to the previous provocation, right? So GIFs are a really snazzy way for you to introduce your curriculum to your students by asking those 3 questions. Here's another GIF. I absolutely love this one. This one is for either the concept of revolution or maybe even dictatorship. And I would throw this up and I'd ask the 3 same questions again. What do you notice? What do you wonder? What do you know? And the observations students come up with are amazing with this GIF, right? Like, well, I can see that the crowd, they're holding flags. And I can see that the crowd, they're quite a bit smaller than this big statue. And I can see that the statues, they're identical and they're constantly revolving. Like every time one's pulled down, another one comes up. It sounds like history repeating itself. And my mind is blown. I'm like, yay, they're getting it. Before I've even taught them anything, I get a really good understanding of what they know and what they don't know. And what do they wonder? Well, they could say things like, well, I wonder what's written on those flags. What's the purpose of those flags? Are they using them to communicate some kind of an idea? You know, who are these statues? Who are these people that are, you know, represented as these figures? And why does history repeat itself? And then what do you know? There's my brainiac 10-year-old Ewan, the World War I military history buff. He puts up his hand and he starts talking about a military dictator. And he starts bringing in this context of, well, this is what's happening here because I know this. But we didn't start with my brainiac son. We didn't start with him first because that would ruin the curiosity of everyone in the room. And that wouldn't give an invitation to everyone in the room to engage with our curriculum in a personally relevant way. So provocations could be many things, you know, artifacts. I'm going to switch this slide here just because it's so distracting, the GIF. I'll go back to this one. You know, provocations can be artifacts. I have a big suitcase in my classroom. It's tucked away in a closet, and it's full of really neat things that I bring out to spark curiosity. You know, I have a beautiful conch shell, and I wish it was here, but it's a beautifully big shell that you can actually blow into, and it creates this resonating, hollow sound in the school. And if you've read Lord of the Flies, you know that that conch shell, that's a really significant symbol in Lord of the Flies. And so that would be a provocation I would bring in out of my suitcase to introduce this concept of democracy, and that's evident in the book, and introduce the symbolism that's evident in the book. So, you know, the setting provocation, the image provocation, the GIF provocation, and then the object provocation are really great ways, combined with those 3 questions, what do you notice, what do you wonder, what do you know, to really hook your students in the curriculum. The last thing I'm going to show you before we pause, I'm just going to go to the very end here. It's this last sketch note by Rebecca. And if we had more time, we would spend time unpacking this a bit. But I really just want teachers, as they're watching the webinar, to pause and look at this graphic and really consider how the design of our classrooms invites students in to be curious learners, and how we can make some really small tweaks in how we, you know, present the space of our rooms to our students, so that we do spark curiosity and interest in our classroom and in our curriculum. So just pause it, have a look. There's a lot going on there. And of course, all of these sketch notes are chapters from both of my books. So whether you're an elementary school teacher or a middle school, high school teacher, or maybe you teach at the higher ed level, we unpack all of these sketch notes through chapters in the books. You can find the books on Amazon.com, very affordably priced. I think they're $17 right now on Amazon. So go tap your principal on the shoulder and say, buy myself one of these books, please. If there's interest, and I'll shoot this out there as an offering to anyone watching, if there's interest from your principal to buy everyone on staff a book, please send me an email and we'll get you bulk pricing, definitely discounted from that $17 to make it more affordable. And combined with that, there's a free book club resource on my website, trevormackenzie.com, that you could use to facilitate the reading of those books. And of course, we can do another webinar with your school for Pro D Day. If you read the book, invite me in and I can answer questions for you. Julie, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and I'll transition to you just with regards to any kind of goodbyes that you'd like to say or any closing remarks, if you will.
Well, I'd like to open it up real quick, if we could, for any questions real quick before Trevor has to sign off. Anybody have any questions they'd like to ask at this time? Or they could put it in the chat.
No questions from Humboldt, Iowa, but just sure appreciate your insight. I might have made a mistake. I just downloaded or just got the Audible book for your book. So that might be a mistake. I'm going to probably wish I had the paper copy.
I don't think that's a mistake, Tamala. I think you'll love it, and I'm glad that you got it. I'm also an audiobook fan, so yeah, by all means, enjoy it and let me know your thoughts. And if you have any questions as you listen, please do reach out, okay?
Okay, sounds great. Thanks a bunch.
The sketch notes are on your website, right? So she can still access those?
Can you say that again, Leslie? I didn't catch the beginning.
You said the sketch notes are on your website, so with the Audible book, she'll still be able to access those?
Yeah, absolutely. And Tamala, there's actually an audiobook section on my website that when you're listening to the audiobook, it's going to prompt you to go to my website. They'll give you the URL and it will send you to different resources that we refer to in the audiobook. So everything will be there for you on the website, and they'll prompt you to go to the website when you're listening.
Thank you. And Trevor, I just made a note about a couple questions that I just wanted to follow up regarding some of the schools, including your school, that I might just email you specific questions, because I know that the school that you talked about with Know Me Before You Teach Me, yeah. I didn't quite catch that name, and then I think I got the name of your school, but it'd be also interesting for us to kind of look at some of these schools and what they're doing as well, as it relates to student-centered learning, inquiry-based learning. We really appreciate you taking this time to do this. I know Leslie and I learn every time we're with one of our fellow educators, and we appreciate the expertise and the willingness to share what you're doing and how you're doing it and how you're helping, educators across the globe. So we appreciate the concreteness, the sharing of free resources beyond just this webinar, and we're thrilled to meet you. And we plan to follow up by following you on various social media channels as well as your website. So we can't thank you enough for doing this today.
Well, I appreciate you too. And today was just a small drop in the bucket in terms of, what student-centered learning and inquiry is all about. So by all means, to the people who are watching, please reach out. I don't know if you've noticed, but the sun has just beautifully come out here through my bay window. And so it's a perfect ending to a beautiful time with you all. I appreciate your leadership and your support of your staff and your teachers there. And I look forward to connecting in the future. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.